Dejan, gringo. ¡Te maté! Hi, this is Greg with Lionquestfitness. Today we're going to talk about Colonel Rex Applegate and the development of the 640 Smith & Wesson, also the 642. Now let me throw out a few disclaimers. Number one, forgive my execrable Spanish. I'm decades out of practice. Also, I did not have a break top revolver, but I did have this Model 36 with a 3-inch barrel that stood in its place. Now, as far as Colonel Applegate, he was actually a very large man, somewhat prone to being heavy set. And as far as I know, he never wore a hat, and most times he wore his shirt out to conceal his handgun. And as I was researching this, trying to find out what a Mexican farmer, laborer would have wore in the 1950s, well, they dressed like the Americans from that period, except they were very neat. Every picture I found, they were always buttoned down, shirt tucked in. So just excuse me for those things, and let's talk about Colonel Applegate. Colonel Rex Applegate was with the OSS during World War II, which is the forerunner of our modern CIA. He taught many of our troops in hand-to-hand combat, in close-quarter fighting, close-quarter shooting. In fact, he wrote the Bible of close-quarter self-defense called Kill or Get Killed, which has been used by the military and law enforcement for many decades. Now, at the time that this incident happened, Colonel Applegate was serving as a consultant to the Mexican Army with an honorary title of general with them. And he was accompanied by a Mexican Army officer who was carrying a 1911 in a flap holster. Now, what precipitated this attack by this drunken campesino? It's kind of lost to time. I think Colonel Applegate was, in reading his account of the story, really didn't know why he did it, except that he was very drunk. I tend to believe, since this incident happened on the Guatemalan-Mexican border, and this being an Indian peasant, farmer, laborer, very possibly the sight of the Mexican Army officer and the sight of his uniform might have been what triggered him in his intoxicated condition. Once again, that's kind of lost to time. But randomly, or seemingly randomly, he attacked or tried to attack Applegate and the officer with a machete. Now, the officer was trying desperately to get that 1911 out, and Rex Applegate had what was called the lemon squeezer, which was a Smith & Wesson break top revolver. It had a shrouded hammer. It actually had a grip safety. Now, it was chambered in .38 Smith & Wesson, which is a less powerful cartridge than .38 Special. Now, he shot the campesino 5 times, and he said, I didn't think he was going to go down. In fact, he was fixing to throw the gun at him when he finally fell at his feet. And Applegate at the time was also a consultant with Smith & Wesson, and he contacted the powers that be at Smith & Wesson, and he said, can't you make a gun chambered in .38 Special that's small size, concealable, has the shrouded hammer? And so Smith & Wesson in 1952 came out with what was called the Centennial model. And it was sold, it was based on the J-frame, shrouded hammer. It still had the grip safety. And it sold for several decades up until the late 70s. Now in 1990, they brought the Centennial back as the 640. This time no grip safety. Now this one's chambered in 357. It also has a 2 1/8 inch barrel. It's a very sleek gun, very concealable, like a leopard, it reminds me of a Black Panther. Now they also came out with an airweight version with a 1 7/8 barrel that was only chambered in 38 Special Plus P. Now an interesting side on the 640, Ed Lovett in his book about snubby revolvers was talking about his time that he served as a firearms instructor for the CIA. And during the 90s, this was an issued sidearm for their field agents, as well as the Browning high power. Now this isn't a high power, it's a high power clone, but it gives you an indication of the size difference. Now in training, the agents, they loved the high power and they really didn't like the 640. However, in the field, which one do you think that they gravitated to carrying? And it was the 640, because it's very concealable. You can carry it in a pocket, carry it on your waist, shoulder holster, very versatile. Now any discussion of Rex Applegate and firearms, you need to talk about his system or his style of shooting, which was one-handed. And it was designed for the battlefields of World War II and some of the close quarter fighting during that time. Now what Applegate taught was that you carried the gun in a crouch, which made sense for that type of warfare. And that when you fired, you brought your shoulder up, your arm out straight, you looked down your arm, and you looked down the barrel of the gun. Now a lot of people say that, they call it point shooting, that you're not actually using your sights, but that's not necessarily the case, because you're using the profile of the gun to aim at the target. So let's go ahead and demonstrate how that looks. Now actually, this is a very practical way of shooting, especially say like you're having to clear a room by yourself, which I don't recommend. Or maybe you're holding a flashlight in one hand. Or maybe you're walking through rough terrain and you need this hand for balance, or in case you fall. Or maybe you need this arm to deflect an attack. So let's see how this looks with somebody facing you, pops out from the front. Another good thing about this style of shooting, it's easy to maneuver and pivot. But what you don't want to do is swing the gun around. What you do want to do is follow the body like that. So let's see how this would look. So this is Greg with Lionquestfitness, reminding you, your first step in self-defense is avoiding those situations where you might actually have to defend yourself.